Welcome back to the channel. Today I want to speak about No Rest for the Wicked. It's a game that's in early access. I've put about 22 hours into it, and people are describing this game as an isometric Dark Souls or an isometric Souls-like game. And while it has some of those elements, and I can see where that comparison is coming from, there's actually a bunch of other stuff that breaks that mold, and this game really is a mix of other games and genres all smashed together. And I think if you only consider it as an isometric Dark Souls, it can be a little bit misleading, and I think people might not give it a shot. So I want to speak about all the facets of this game and give a brief review. I'll also give some criticisms towards the end, remembering that this is in early access and you only had a portion of the campaign. But I think you get a really good understanding of what this game is about and the gameplay loop. And I kind of got addicted to it. I wanted to play a little bit more. It has Souls-like aspects. It surprisingly has a lot of survival crafting aspects, which I did not expect. And it also feels a little bit like Diablo. And that's not because of the combat, because the combat is vastly different. And in fact, somebody asked me, is it like Diablo when I first started playing? And I was like, no, this is nothing like Diablo. And then when I got to the end game, or I finished the campaign and this new section or this new mode unlocked, and I started looking at the loot, and I started gobbling up loot like a loot goblin and looking at builds, I was like, okay, I get where the Diablo impression is coming from now, apart from just the, isometric perspective. But like the loot side of stuff, I can see that too. And so this game blends all those genres or games together. I'm going to take you through it. So let's start with the Souls-like similarities. Off the bat, it's going to be brutally difficult, and it's going to feel like a Souls game just based on the combat, even though the perspective is completely different. You're not going to be able to just spam attacks. Every single enemy is going to feel lethal when you first start. Your weapons are going to feel weighty and meaty. Even like the light weapons still have a fair bit of weight to them. You're going to have to learn enemy attacks. You're going to have to learn when to counter, and that's all going to feel very familiar if you like Souls games. Every weapon type has a unique feel to them too, and there are they're called uniques. They're like exotics or legendaries or whatever the highest tier of weapon. And even if you have like a unique greatsword versus like another greatsword, they have like a different animation and a different feel to them. In fact, when I was playing, I actually really liked the greatsword, and then I got a unique greatsword and I actually hated the animation. I hated the roll with the slash that it did. It just felt like it was too long. And so there is a lot of different play styles and different things to like about the weapons. Each weapon also can equip certain runes, and runes are basically like weapon abilities, and you charge up your weapon abilities by landing hits or parrying, and then you can unleash this powerful move. This also doubles as almost like a mana meter when you're casting spells. So essentially, if you like want to do a magic build, you can't just sit back and throw fireballs the whole time. You actually got to go in there, get some hits, which will build up your meter, and then you can actually unleash your runes, which are like your weapon abilities. And for using magic, that's what you use, right? You throw fireballs and do whatever. You're also going to get the Souls-like vibe when you come across these big bosses, these grotesque bosses with multiple heads and multiple limbs, and these massive combos that they throw at you, where you might have to learn their combos, learn when to dodge, learn when to attack, and take down these massive bosses. The level up system is also going to feel very familiar, where you level up and then you invest points into certain attributes like your health, your stamina, and very similar to Souls-like games, your weapons will have different affinities. So one weapon might have an affinity for strength, so if you level up strength, it's going to do more damage. The other similarity is going to come with the environment. The environmental design is excellent. There is a lot of verticality, there is a lot of exploration. It is very unique for an isometric viewpoint, because I find most of the time in isometric games, you'll find there'll be invisible walls and you can't jump off an edge, whereas they let you just jump and yeet yourself off everything in this game. Multiple areas have multiple levels to them where you can explore, and you can find treasure chests and items and new areas to open up. And I often found this happen a lot, where it's like, oh, what's over here? And then before you know it, I've been like going for an hour through some random dungeon. Well, it's not really a dungeon, and I'll talk more about what I think would be considered a dungeon towards the end of the video. And just like a Souls-like experience, you're going to unlock these shortcuts. You're going to go, oh, I'm back at the start. Or I've just unlocked this. I've unlocked a new save point. I'm back to this point. cool. It is very rewarding exploring. The environmental design is top notch. The verticality is really cool for an isometric game. Okay, but for me, that's where most of the Souls-like similarities kind of stop. And then there are a bunch of differences. Let me talk you through these. I think when people hear the word Souls-like, they think of like bonfires or rest points where you can rest, you get your health back, you get probably your standard potions, your health potions back, and the enemies respawn. That does not happen in this game. You will find a campsite, but it is mainly, or it's pretty much only for cooking. You collect recipes and you cook at them, and this is actually how you restore your health. You don't rest at it to restore your health. The enemies don't respawn when you sit at a campsite. You go to a campsite and you use recipes to cook, and this is the main way that you restore health. In the early game, this is the only way that you can restore health without dying. Later on, you actually unlock like a bed that you can sleep at to restore health. But early on, you will be crafting a lot of items to restore health so you can make it and explore the map. You also don't drop your souls or drop your experience when you die. Anytime you kill an enemy, it adds on that experience straight away towards your next level. When you level up, you get 3 attribute points, and then you can put them into your health, your stamina, your strength, whatever you want to level up, whatever build you're going for. And so you're probably thinking then, well, what is the risk? Because the risk in like a Souls-like game is you gain all this experience points, you're trying to get through a level, and then you drop them, and then you have to try and make it back as all the enemies respawn. If the enemies don't respawn when you die, and you only use campfires for cooking, like what's the kind of like catch here? Well, the catch is durability. When you die, the equipment that you have equipped actually loses a portion of durability, and eventually it will break. Your tools shatter and you need to repurchase them. I actually don't know what happens to armor and weapons if they break, because I never wanted them to break, because my like pickaxe broke, lost its durability, and then I was like, and it just disappeared. I'm pretty sure your equipment you can't equip it, like so gear like weapons and armor, if it goes to 0 durability, it gets removed, I think, and then you have to repair it. And when I played this on day 1, this was actually brutal. I think you lost 10 points of durability every time you died. So, and most gear had, I don't know, like 100 points of durability. So 10 deaths and it's basically done. And then you have to go and repair that gear. And obviously repairing stuff costs money. So that's kind of the risk with this game, is the durability system. They actually patched this pretty early on because I think people were complaining about it. And it went from 10 to 5, like losing 5 points of durability when you die. So a lot more forgiving, but day 1 was pretty brutal. And the interesting thing about this is I actually find this system more brutal than like a Souls-like system. Because what I find in like Souls-like games is you accumulate all these XP points and you usually spend them, or you lose them and you try to get them back. But either way, once you've spent them or once you've lost them, there's no real risk for like exploring or trying or seeing what's over there or seeing what's down this pathway or trying to parry or trying a different weapon, right? Because you've got nothing to lose. You've already spent your points or you've lost it. In this game, there's just always risk of durability. If you die, you're going to lose durability off your items. Of course, you could unequip everything if you want to like play around with a certain weapon, but it's not really going to give you practice because it will also impact your equipment load, which I should mention, which is very Souls-like. You can have like light equipment, meaning you can dash very quickly, like your equipment load. You can have medium, which is like a normal dodge, and you can have like a heavy equipment load, meaning like your fat rolling. That being said, heavy equipment load and fat rolling is pretty forgiving in this game, and I actually played the whole way through fat rolling, and it was actually pretty fine. You also get an additional ability when you are heavy equipment, which is a shoulder charge, which is actually pretty good too. So they offset some of the negatives of equipment load and fat rolling, which I found pretty big. But overall, that's the main like difference from like a Souls-like game. You're not dropping your experience points. Enemies aren't being respawned, which encourages exploration. So when you destroy an enemy and you die, they don't respawn, or they take a little bit of time to respawn, like quite a long time. So when you progress through an area, you really do progress through an area. Once you've killed that enemy, they are unlikely to come back while you're still exploring it. It's when you go and do like a side quest and another quest and pick up a bounty or a challenge, or, you know, in a completely different area and you come back much later, that you actually have different enemies. The world actually changes a bit as well, depending on what you're doing and where you are in your campaign quests, and you'll find there'll be different enemies in that spot, but they're not like respawning each time. And so obviously this really changes the pace of this kind of game. It becomes less of like slogging your way through an area, and more like if you can take out certain enemies, you will slowly make progression. But you're probably asking, what happens if you get stuck on a boss? What happens if you get blockaded in an area and everyone seems too tough, or a boss seems too difficult? Because in a Souls-like game, you do two things. You either A, get good, right? You learn the boss moves, you learn the counters, you learn what it's weak to, and you just keep smashing your head against the wall until you get it right. Or B, you go and farm an enemy, right? You go find a XP farm somewhere where there are a lot of enemies can respawn. You rest at the bonfire, they all come back, you wipe them out, you rest again, you bring the enemies back, and you keep farming XP until you can level up a little bit. You can't really do that in this game. You can farm XP, but you can't farm XP in the same place because those enemies aren't respawning. So what do? This is where the survival crafting aspect of this game plays heavily. So let's move on to that portion. Very early on in the game, you discover the main town, and there are a bunch of vendors in there. Some of those vendors you actually need to rescue out in the wild through side quests and just discovering them to unlock their abilities. But also they start off being pretty bad. They can't really deliver many services to you. And then the way that you improve them is you actually got to rebuild the town. And this is actually really cool because the town changes. Like some vendors are just standing like out in the open, like, buy my stuff. And as you upgrade the town, they get like a house and they get new upgrade areas, very similar to like a survival crafting game. And not only that, is you go through like this normal progression of, you start with like copper. You have to collect copper and pine wood, and you have a pickaxe and you have a normal axe, and the starting area will give you copper and pine wood. And then you go to this guy and you hand in those materials, and he will build the town for you. And it takes some time to build certain things, like an hour or 4 hours, 3 hours, which, by the way, you can log off and that time still progresses. And then those vendors get upgraded, and then you can actually upgrade your weapons even more. So when you first start out, your weapons require like copper to upgrade. And then when you get to like level 2, they require steel to upgrade. And then I think the next level is probably silver to upgrade. So to upgrade your gear, you actually need to find a consumable, these like weapon upgrade parts, but you also need to like progress the town and rebuild the town so you can upgrade your gear, your armor, and your weapons. And so this creates a very interesting gameplay loop where you go from maybe getting your butt kicked by a boss and not being able to progress to like cutting down trees. And this has literally happened to me. I got up to a boss, I was underleveled, not just underleveled, I was undergeared. And then I was like, okay, I guess I need to upgrade my town. I went and farmed copper, mined trees. Other way around. I went and mined copper, farmed trees, upgraded my town, upgraded all my gear, and then went back and kicked the boss's butt. Very interesting from like a Souls-like experience where you would go and farm enemies to increase your attribute points. Now, I do have some complaints about this, but I'll get towards the criticisms towards the end of the video. Overall, I kind of like that kind of pace. It was kind of chill. It was kind of nice to get off stream and be like, okay, I'm just going to go find some copper. Felt like I was progressing the game, I was progressing the story. Nothing challenging about it. I was just revisiting early areas to farm trees and farm copper. Now, that's not the only sort of survival crafting aspect of this game. I think if you put the enemies and bosses like on a scale from like get good and like power through with items, it's probably closer to the crafting power through than it is like the get good learn boss moves. You obviously definitely can like learn all the bosses attacks, and that's part of the game anyway. That's the Souls-like aspect, but there is really a heavy crafting influence. When you go to take on a boss, you're going to make sure that you have crafted as many health items as you can, crafting other items that increase your poise or give you more stamina, and you really want to go in there pretty beefy to take on this boss. And that reminded me a lot of survival crafting games, like getting all that prep in before going and seeing a boss. It's not just about learning the moveset, it's about going in prepared. And I really enjoyed that. And this game really does rely upon a lot of crafting. Some games you have the option to crafting and it makes the game easier, but you can just breeze through the game without really investing in it. I find that this game, you can't do that. This is an integral part of the game to make sure you're cooking at campsites, you're upgrading your vendors, you're at the alchemy tables, making potions, whatever, so you can get through this next boss. And under the topic of like survival crafting aspects, you can also eventually purchase a house where you can put storage in those houses. You craft the boxes after you've upgraded the like woodworker, you craft storage, you can put your items into storage. You can also purchase like upgrade workbenches to put into your house, so you can almost act as a vendor in your house near your storage. And I've got complaints about that, but that's kind of also how this has survival crafting elements in this game. Right, and the last aspect I mentioned this game includes is like the Diablo loot grind. And so I was really surprised about this too. I went into this game not knowing anything. And when I finished the portion of the campaign that was available in the early access, a new area unlocks, and it's basically called the Crucible. And it is a randomized dungeon essentially that takes you through multiple stages and ends in a boss. Now, I wasn't able to complete it, even though I was probably close to the right level. And the reason I couldn't complete it is my stats were completely all over the place because I wanted to make a review. So every time I picked up a weapon and it had like a attribute requirement, I would just put stats into it so I could play around with that weapon. Something needed faith, I was like, okay, I'll put faith. It needed dexterity, okay, I made dexterity. So like my stats are completely bogged, and I actually couldn't pass this because it was too difficult. I think if I had invested my points correctly, it would have been fine. But this makes a really good end game loop, a replayable loop of making the right build to progress through these crucibles, to get more loot, to make better builds, and kind of like min-maxing. And this is where this sort of Diablo loot comparison comes from. So starting with rarity, you have common items like this that are just grey. And as you can see at the top, you have 4 slots, which are your rune slots. These are your weapon abilities. This one only has one weapon ability, which is twirl spin. And then it's got, I can actually put other weapon abilities onto it, right? And you can also extract weapon abilities too. So if you get a weapon that drops with a weapon ability that you like, you can extract it, destroys the weapon, and you can place it onto a new weapon. You also have 4 gem slots, and you can these increase things like, I'll just see what I've got here. This has got a gem on it. Gain 3% focus on damage dealt. Focus is that ability bar that allows you to do your weapon skill, right? Which is pretty cool. So I do damage, I get 3% focus. Nice. You'll likely notice there are some other rarity types. We have this blue, which is actually just called rare. And this has a bunch of stats on it. Experience gain increased by 3%. Health increased by 10%. Items weight decreased by 28. Plague resistance increased by 24. And then we have a purple one, and this is a cursed object or a cursed armor piece. And so it has improved enchantments on it, but it also has 1 negative. So it has focus gain increased by 30%, but it has experience gain decreased by 5% right at the bottom in the red. So you can get blues that have all positives, and you get purples that have really good positives, but also 1 negative. And the farm here is, you go to this vendor here to enchant stuff. Click on enchant, and you can only enchant common gear. So I'll do one here for you. If we enchant, let's see, apprentice's coat. Well, I can enchant this. It's going to cost me 1 silver to enchant this. And it's going to remove 2 rune slots and the last 3 gem slots. So I'll do that. And this can't be reversed. Cool. Now, there is some improvements in the UI that needs to happen. Like, it doesn't show me what it just rolled. I have to go back out, open my inventory, and find where I put that. It was this thing here, apprentice's coat. And so now it is a rare. So I've got no negatives on it. It randomly rolled to being a rare. It's got all positives. Health increased by 14%. Items durability increased by 9%. Plague resistance by 22%. Stamina regeneration increased by 13%. Cool. So that is like what keeps you playing is finding items, randomly enchanting them, seeing what they get rolled with, and seeing if it forms a build that you can use. So for me, I went with a big old fat boy build. All my stuff has item weight decreased by 39%, or this has item weight decreased by 39. This has item weight decreased by 28. This is item weight decreased by 20. This has none of those stuff on it, right? So I'm running like super heavy armor and I'm not encumbered. When you're encumbered, you can't do anything. So you got to be in the heavy class slot. Then I have armor increased by 17, armor increased by 23, armor increased by 17. So I have these rings here that add additional stats to my build. And that's kind of how you like min-maxing what your play style. And of course, everything costs money. So you might unlock a blueprint for a piece of weapon or an armor. It's going to cost you money and materials to craft it. Then you're going to probably go over here. You're going to go see Eleanor again. You're going to enchant it. You're going to see if you get the right rolls on it. And then you're going to see if it fits into your build. So there is a lot of grinding here if you're going for like the perfect build. Obviously, I need to spend a lot more time with it to see like what stats are best and what, goes with it. I don't know enough about that yet, but it definitely has potential to be very grindy in a good way, The other thing I should mention, there are unique weapon drops. I got all of mine from bosses. These are like exotics or legendaries. They have more weapon skills on them and they also have enchantments on them. I assume they are like an exotic or legendary. They're like predetermined rolls on them that drop at a certain percentage from bosses, right? But overall, this is where you're investing your time and money to get the right roll, to make the right build, to progress through the Crucible. And you can see how that has this Diablo feel to it, but obviously the combat is incredibly different. And as you can see, this game has lots of different elements blended together. It has that Souls-like combat and exploration. It has survival crafting components where you're going from getting copper to iron, copper iron pickaxes and like going out and farming. And then you also have this like Diablo loot, or this aspect that reminds you of like Diablo looting and making builds and then progressing through randomized dungeons. Now, with all that said, I had a fantastic time with it. I spent over 20 hours playing the game. This is an early access. You can definitely get through the campaign a lot quicker than that. I don't know how long you can spend playing this game. Like it is not complete yet. I would probably advise not getting it unless all of this sounds really, really good to you and you want to support the developers and you like every aspect of this, and you probably would expect to play for maybe like 25, 30 hours, unless you are like going nuts and trying to make like a perfect build and just grinding it out. But just like first time experiences and like knowing the game, understanding the game, playing a little bit of the Crucible, maybe passing the Crucible once and then putting it down, 25 to 30 hours, I think you'd be done with it. Do I have any criticisms? Yes, of course. And a lot of these things I think will be balanced out after the pre-release, after the alpha, whatever. What's it called? Early access. Early access, yeah. I think a lot of this will be ironed out and they're already very quick to make patches. So take this with a grain of salt. And these are some of my criticisms of the game. Firstly, I think the survival crafting aspect, it got a little bit long for me. It was completely fine when I had quests and I had bounties and I was like progressing the game. I would just farm trees and mine stuff as I went. But obviously I hit some roadblocks. I had to go back to farming. I didn't mind doing that for a while, but I felt like it got a little bit long with how many materials I needed to get. They obviously knew this and acknowledged this pretty quickly, because just today they introduced a patch to reduce how much, to increase the clay drop from digging. One of the upgrades for the towns is you need clay, and it's like, it's tough to get. People were also creating like new realms to farm materials, so you can basically start like a new game plus whenever, and you take your geared character into a new game, and because the new game spawns you like in the starting area with like wood and all the materials that you need for the early game like level ups, you just start a new game. It's almost quicker to start a new game and just like farm those trees straight away and then go back to your main game and then like upgrade the town. So people were also doing that to try to fast track getting some of the materials. I think they'll be onto it. They've already like adjusted how clay works, so that's good. I think there needs to be a little bit of balancing there. And I also think it was more of an issue because I ran out of stuff to do. I finished the main quest. There's also like a like a bounty guy that gives you like daily challenges and weekly challenges and bounties to do that send you back through certain areas to defeat certain bosses, which is pretty cool, by the way. Like new bosses spawn, or like new mini bosses spawn when you pick up these bounties. And it makes it feel fresh to go back to those areas. But I actually completed all of them, completed all my quests for like that day, and I just kind of got bored farming iron and trees. I also think only being able to progress the campaign to a certain point impacted my level and experience and attributes and all that kind of stuff, and I couldn't quite complete the Crucible as well as I would have liked to at my level. Because I was experimenting with stats and trying different weapons, I felt it really heavily punished you for it, which is fair. But I think what the game should do is have like a training area where you can at least experiment with some of the weapons without being punished so much. Maybe some people want that. Maybe some people like, no, get good. Like that's the whole point of these games. You like start a new game, start a new character, make a different build. In this build, in this game, in the early access, you can't actually reset your stat points. I think that would have been really nice to be able to reset your stat points in early access so you could experiment with different weapons and see how they feel. So that didn't feel too good. And for me, because I had distributed my stats all over the place and I couldn't do this Crucible, this randomized dungeon, and I had finished the main quest, there wasn't actually many opportunities for me to like increase my attribute points. So it kind of got to be a little bit of a grind for me to even get to the level of being able to complete the Crucible. And when you do the Crucible, it actually requires an item. You got to put an item in it. So every time you have an attempt at the Crucible, it actually costs you an item. But like I said, I don't think this would be an issue if I could have just progressed the main campaign. Eventually I would have leveled up to the right level and have the right attribute points to actually go into the Crucible and be a bit more competent in there. There were some really painful like survival crafting aspects as well, apart from getting a little bit long when you had to go and collect iron or farm wood. But running backwards and forwards between your storage is insanely painful. Early on, you won't have any upgrades and you only have one storage box and it's in this tower and you got to go the long way to unlock it. And then so if you're at a vendor, it doesn't pull from storage. You got to go to the vendor, work out what you need. You got to run all the way back to your storage. You got to run back to the vendor and do it that way. Eventually you can upgrade the town and you get like shortcuts to your chest, and that makes it a little bit quicker. And then eventually you get a house and you have storages in your house, and that's probably about the same amount of time, but you can store more things in your house because you can make your own boxes. And then eventually you can make items in your house so you don't have to leave your storage areas. Like you can put a stove in there and like an alchemy table and that kind of stuff, so you don't have to go to the vendors as much to craft items. But I just found that a little bit too much busy work and a little bit too annoying. I don't know. I think things should pull from storage, but at the same time, I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to make you attached to your house by putting these items in your house and like crafting in your house, which I kind of like. And I do kind of like how good the world feels and how good the town feels, and running around town feels alive. But my God, when you're into that crafting survival mode and you're running backwards and forwards, it is a pain. There's also a bunch of like UI things that need to be fixed. It doesn't really have a good comparison mode, which seems crazy for a game that gives you so much loot. You can generally see if a weapon is better or worse based on like their attack and poise, like their defense, but you can't like compare the enchantments, which is really what you need to be able to do when you start looking at like an end game build. You need to be able to compare what enchantments are on you're currently equipped and what you're looking at in your inventory. Right now, you got to basically go backwards and forwards between them to see what's happening. There's also a bunch of things which I don't know if this is intentional or not, but you can't read descriptions on like runes. So like your weapon abilities, you have no idea what they do. You've got to kind of invest in them and then see how they work. I don't know if that's intentional. I don't know if they're like, well, yep, you got to try it out, like see if you like it. I think it was a bit rough to purchase runes, place them permanently in a weapon and then not like it. So I think some item descriptions on runes would be much appreciated. And my last criticism relates to the parry system. I think the game is very punishing due to the durability losses, and it would be nice to have like a training area where you could practice parrying, or you could practice using other weapons to see what you like before you invest stat points into them. I moved away from parry very early on because of how punishing the game was. And then I only came back to it a bit later when enemies were a bit weaker and I had a different weapon and it felt really good to parry. I was like, oh, this is kind of nice. And I think a training area would actually go a long way to help people understand what weapons they do like, and also give them opportunity to practice parrying, because it's I don't know, on the scale from like easy to hard, it's probably like in the middle somewhere. It's definitely not an easy parry system. Like the telegraphing is not super obvious, and it's also made a little bit harder because of how punishing the game can be to your durability. So you really don't want to be like experimenting with parrying and just dying all the time and all your gears getting busted up. There you go, that's all the thoughts I have on No Rest for the Wicked. I thoroughly enjoyed my time, but my recommendation is still to probably hold off until it goes into full release, unless all of this sounds super cool to you and you want to support the developers. Then you can go ahead and purchase it. If you'd like to support the channel and cannot think of a comment, you can just leave the word No Rest for the Wicked. As usual, it's been a pleasure. This is Myelin Games. Peace.